the Formed Book Club. Catholic book lovers unpacking good books, chapter by chapter.
Welcome to the Formed Book Club. Stephen Judo, myself, Father Fessio, Joseph Pierce, who needs no introduction, as they say. We are going to continue and almost conclude our discussion of Henri de Bach's book, Father de Bach, The Drama of Atheist Humanism. We are towards the end, second last chapter of The Search for a New Man. We're on page, I believe, 462.
Mm-hmm.
So, Joseph, I hand the baton to you.
Well, the first thing I have is page 464, so I'll hand it back to both of you if any of you are before that.
I have one thing before that, which is not exactly extraneous, but is a little element which points into the future. On the bottom of 462, you're saying that if it is true that the great problems of our temporal life can be resolved only in the light of our total destiny and thus Christianity. On the other hand, it's really lived only on conditions of being, as they say today, fully incarnated, so Christianity incarnated. It is nonetheless true that these confrontations, that is, Christianity with temporality, are always in danger, as we've had occasion to apply above, of misleading and blurring something what in minds the distinction between the plane of nature and that of the supernatural. So what he's saying here is that trying to, see how we interpret our historical temporal life in terms of Christ and Christianity, we can blur the supernatural and the natural. And so on the next page, just before that new paragraph, this is why it would be good in closing to look once again, at least in one of its aspects and in all its original force, at the fundamental distinction that must command our whole attention here. What's he talking about? Footnote 122. For another aspect of the problem, see Recherche de Sciences Religieuses, a magazine, Le Mystère le Surnaturel, the mystery of the supernatural. This is one of de Lubach's major contributions, was the discussion of the relation between nature and the supernatural. And he wrote a book called Surnaturel in 1947, just after the World War II. And for various reasons, got him in trouble with Rome and the censors, and he was actually censored after that. But it'll become one of his most important legacies, is how he discussed Thomas Aquinas and the original Thomistic understanding of how supernature is not some kind of a second story, separate from nature is the first story. Anyway, it's a major theme in theology to which he made one of the major contributions. So I just want to say that, and we'll go on with the Search for a New Man. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, now that you've brought this up, it causes me to ask another question, that if the supernatural is not what you just said, then what is it?
Read his book, Surnaturel, which he later did as two books, which is called, I think, Augustinianism, and what's it called, Thomas? And the second book is called The Mystery of the Supernatural.
And do we publish them?
No.
No, well.
I think Notre Dame does one.
Yeah, I think it's published by some other very, respectable publisher.
Okay.
So that's as far as I can go.
Do you have anything prior to 464, Vivian?
No.
Well, I wanted immediately after where Father left off there with the footnote at the end of that paragraph. The next paragraph is about St. Augustine and the love he had for Rome, quote, the true homeland of his spirit. could only accentuate his pessimism when he saw Rome devastated by Alaric and its empire invaded by the barbarians. He drew from it a twofold lesson at the time, one of detachment and hope. Quote, "Do not become attached," he said, "to this old man that the world is. Do not be afraid. Your own youth will be renewed like an eagle's." So again, this I think is a very important lesson for us, because I think every generation is tempted to believe it lives in the worst of times. You know, we got the opening line of Dickens's novel, "It was the best of times, it was the worst of times." And most of us tend to think we live in the worst of times. And I think it's difficult for us to imagine how cataclysmic the fall of Rome was. This was the eternal city, not merely in a symbolic heavenly sense, but in a real political philosophical sense, and it comes tumbling down, and civilization is overrun by barbarians, people with no real culture. It would have been very easy to either despair or assume the apocalypse or what have you. And what Augustine does here is one of the wisest saints in the history of the church. He says, well, it just shows that we can't trust worldliness. We need both detachment from the world and a hope that takes us beyond the world. And so we mustn't become attached to this world, whether it's our own country, our own culture, our own times, our own mores, if they are something which are temporal and not eternal. And then it's like, do not be afraid. So the hope is your own youth will be renewed. So the world is an old man, right? It's passing away. Whereas our own youth will be renewed. And of course, that must mean that if we keep our eyes on the heavenly reward, right, the finishing line, then we will attain that heavenly eternal city, which will never grow old and which will never be overthrown by barbarians. So I think it does lead us to keep our focus where it needs to be, not in this world, although we do have to obviously fight within this world for that which is good, true, and beautiful, but to our eternal destiny in heaven.
Yes, and so you were a citizen of the British Empire, which was not attacked by the barbarians exactly like Rome was, but certainly declined from its position of preeminence in geopolitical terms. And you're now a citizen of the American Empire, which I believe is in decline. And I think we're moving towards a multipolar world. But I've often thought, why would I not be proud if I were Maltese or Croatian? They've got wonderful countries. They're not superpowers. But why do you have to be a superpower? Why do you have to have colonies? Why do you have to have, we have 800 military bases in foreign countries? The U.S. does? 800? We don't need that. So, if we go from strength to strength, so be it. If it's more likely we go from strength to weakness to greater weakness, that's all right. Like you say, the heavenly Jerusalem, which is present in the church, is renewed like an eagle.
Yeah, and Father, a few comments upon that, if I may. First of all, rather whimsically, I was born a citizen of the British Empire. I think technically the Commonwealth at the time I was born, not quite old enough for the Empire, but I was born a citizen of the British Commonwealth and then became a citizen of the United States. So I've just jumped from one sinking ship to another. That seems to be my destiny. That's the first thing. But but the other key thing is that a key part of my conversion to Christianity was my conversion from being a great Britisher who was proud of the empire to being a little Englander who was just happy to have the Yorkshire Dales and the Yorkshire Moors and the beauty of my own country. I didn't want to rule anybody else. And as regards the United States, of course, the irony is that the United States was formed because of its rebellion against empire, and then it has become itself an empire. And so there's all sorts of worldly secular ironies here, which really is part of a comedy of errors, or a tragedy of errors, if you prefer. But again, it doesn't detract anything from our detachment from this world and our hope for the world to come.
And I think, I mean, we try to be patriots, Joseph, but Vivian has a son in the Marines, and she's a patriot and a good one. And I think it's good. Patriotism is good, love of the fatherland and willing to sacrifice for the fatherland. At the same time, other people have fatherlands too. And we cannot make this our lasting city, that's for sure.
Yeah, and Chesterton sort of encapsulated the issue here. He says this: to say my country right or wrong is like saying my mother drunk or sober. You know, if your motherland is drunk, then your duty is to sober her up, not to go along with the drunken debauch.
But by the same token, you never stop loving your mother.
Of course.
So patriotism is really love of home. It doesn't mean that other people don't or shouldn't love their homes, or that in loving your home you want to deprive them of theirs, or love of home. And yes, if it's gone astray, if the members of your family are going astray, then you do, out of love, actually try to.
It's because you love your motherland that you want to sober her up. If you didn't, you wouldn't bother. You just walk away.
Exactly. So having a bit of detachment and criticism is not an act of disloyalty. It's an act of greater loyalty to say, I love you too much to leave you the way you are. I mean, that's what God says to us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Also, I mean, in the midst of a bunch of many inappropriate remarks of former President Trump, he did once say this, which I thought was very good, because his motto was MAGA, Make America Great, but he said, look, I want every country to be great again, but I'm an American, and therefore I want us to be great. That doesn't mean I want to be us to denigrate or look down upon other countries. Each country should want to be great again. I thought it was a pretty good remark. Whether he meant it or not, I can't tell you that, but I thought it was well said.
Yeah.
Well, okay, we're moving forward.
I have nothing else in this chapter until the final page, 468. So if anybody has anything before that, then speak up.
All right. Well, the bottom of page 465, 2 lines up. Whatever, therefore, may be the natural progress gained even in mortal lives. So he's saying there may be some progress here in history. Whatever might be the new idea elaborated, something else must intervene in order to confer on all this its definitive value. So whatever human progress there is needs something more. A transfiguration incommensurable with any natural transformation. That is to say, Christ, the supernatural, have to impinge upon anything which we do to make it truly valuable. All right. Is that the end of the chapter, Vivian? I see a lot of marks on your page.
Well, no, and Joseph has something else. You wanted to...
Not till 468, not to the final page.
You don't have anything till the final page?
Not till 468.
You've underlined both pages.
I have too much, because, this thing read to me like a hymn, I mean, it was so beautiful. And, but here's another point about the supernatural that intrigues me now, what he means by, in the middle of the second paragraph on 466, the supernatural is not a higher, more beautiful, or more fruitful nature. It is not, as is sometimes said today, through a poor
neologism.
Thank you. An overnature. It is the eruption of a wholly different principle, the sudden opening of a kind of fourth dimension, without proportion of any kind to all the progress provided in natural dimensions. And then he goes on, a new creation, a new heart, a new birth, a new childhood. Okay, so somehow, and I don't know where you're going at the last page there, Joseph, with the 8th day. Are you going to talk about that?
Well, I've got it highlighted, but I'm happy to delegate, pass it on to someone else to do it.
Well, because what he's leading to here is this idea that whatever man can do for himself, and he ought not to stop trying. I mean, de Lubac is very clear about that. We are here to work in the vineyard. We are here to make things as good as we can. We are here to make contributions to make things a little bit better than they were before we came. You know, we don't want to lose sight of man's work in the world being something that God has given him to do. And it's a participation in what God is doing. But at the end of the day, the eruption, the new creation, the new heart, the new birth, the new childhood is something that we receive as a gift from God.
Yes.
Our efforts can only go so far, but that full and total transformation into Christ is something given as a gift.
Yes,
I was so full of joy reading this.
Yeah. The only thing I would say about that, just by way of clarification, the eighth day is not just about this world. I mean, ultimately, the eighth day is the whole purpose of this world. Is it will be consummated in eternity at some point, and we will be consummated in eternity long before that, presumably. So, I think that the eighth day is something which is not merely something which is imminent, but something which is beyond.
Yes, and yet
Sorry, please.
I was just going to say, yes, absolutely. That's where de Lubac is taking us. He's taking us, but he wants us to understand and value and appreciate what we do in the world in the time we're given, that it matters. It's a preparation for where God is going to take it. It's just we stumble and fall into all kinds of horrors, actually, when we think we're the ones who are going to bring about this final consummation.
Yeah, and I like the fact that he does end the chapter with a return to that image, that symbol of the Christian Prometheus. We are meant to engage scientifically with the world in which we find ourselves. One thing I'm a little bit puzzled about, and maybe one of you can enlighten me. The first first two sentences on page 468 at the top there. Let man, therefore, confident of divine assistance, take responsibility once again for the work of the 6 days. Let him prolong it throughout the 7th day. So we've talked about the 8th day, and I think it's fair enough. We sort of understand that. But what's the distinction here between the 6th day and the 7th day? Is it that the 6 days is creation and the 7th day is us? So basically, we're taking responsibility for the previous 6 days in the 7th day. Is that what he's saying?
Well, the 6 days are the days of creation. The 7th day God rested, but they're all days for us in time. The 8th day is going to be the transcendence of time. And so we are to take responsibility once again for the work of the 6 days. Let him prolong it throughout this. That is to say, we also not only serve God by our work, we serve God by our worship. And so we must work zealously to try and bring God's presence into the world, and improve the human status. But we also have to pray and bring people into the realization that there are 7 days in the week. 6 days shall man work. On the 7th, we shall worship.
That's wonderful. That's exactly the clarification which I was hoping and which I did not have. So thank you. But so the key thing is the 7th day symbolically is the place of prayer and religion and spirituality in our lives.
No, that's all 7 days, the place of religion and spirituality. But the 7th day is a day when we specifically constitute public worship. Worship.
Okay, good. Understood.
Which actually is a work. You know, like the word liturgy comes from the word for work, but work properly understood, because we live in a 24/7 society where every day, every hour, they're all the same, and they're all for the purposes of work and commerce, and so for him to remind us there are 6 days for the work of trade and commerce and the things you do for a living, but the 7th day also is a work in the sense it's the worship that is our work of praise for God.
Yeah, and again, just to accentuate Father's clarification there as well, that the other 6 days are meant to also be, in some sense, religious, because our work is meant to be holy. Also, we don't inhabit two different worlds. We inhabit
Right.
one. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, well, that, as far as I'm concerned, takes us on to chapter 2, and we still have 10 minutes or so. So I suggest we embark.
We have 10 minutes of silence for prayer? No,
No.
let's move on to
Oh,
chapter.
are we moving on, or is this a long enough session?
Well, it's only 20 minutes so far. I suggest if we want to try to finish next week, we may as well make a start now.
Okay, all right. I would like Father to give us the translation for that last line in, or is this what?
That is the translation after.
It's given it after it, yeah.
Okay, send forth your spirit.
You'll be created.
And that was the prayer for the Second Vatican Council, right? That was the prayer that we were all supposed to be invoking, and we should still be invoking.
Yeah, it's a famous prayer. Veni Sancte Spiritus. So, chapter 2.
Okay.
Nietzsche as mystic.
Yeah, I found this fascinating, actually, because it serves as, I mean, obviously the book's about, is about atheist humanism, and of course Nietzsche has been one of the major figures in that throughout. But this serves as a very succinct summary on the part of de Lubac, quoting other people as he goes along, of Nietzsche, but in such a sense that the Nietzsche as mystic, he has this vision. And there's this sort of blurring Nietzsche's madness at the end. Is this a consequence of this mysticism? And is this mysticism a consequence of some sort of demonic element? Because the way that de Lubac talks about this is as if Nietzsche, in his pride, had opened himself up, if you like, to the demonic and accepts it and embraces it, and then is horrified by it, but it seems at that point to be too late to do anything about it. In other words, that he is, to use the term, possessed. Now, I'm a bit uncomfortable talking about this sort of thing because particularly this is a book about philosophy, and it's about reason, and admittedly, reason sometimes not particularly reasonable, but nonetheless, that the idea is, the goal is to be rational. And so we start about mysticism and demonic possession. We're going into a bit of a twilight zone, but it is de Lubac who entitles the chapter Nietzsche as mystic. So I think that we are called to go there.
Yes, I mean, I'm not in touch with a lot of things, but it seems to me that Nietzsche is not an explicit point of reference in today's academic or common life. He's a figure of the past. I believe he was very much more present in people's minds in the 20s and 30s and even before that of the last century. And de Lubac, I think, like Thomas Aquinas did, like C.S. Lewis did, he's able to see the good and the value even in people with whom he disagrees greatly. And de Lubac presents many positive aspects of what Nietzsche's trying to do. But in this chapter, I mean, it's Lucifer. It's I will not serve. I mean, talk about megalomaniac.
And comes to him as a flash of light. Lucifer means light, right? The angel of light. I mean,
bearing in mind that in some ways the whole Pride movement, is predicated upon Nietzschean principles. That I think it's important for us to sort of see the connection between this Nietzscheanism and pride, which is seen as a virtue now, and that which is ultimately demonic. And so on page 473 here, we have this August 1882, after he has this vision, 2/3 of the way down the page. This is reporting it to someone called Lou Salome. He spoke of it only in obscure words and in a hushed voice, with every indication of the most profound horror. So this vision, is something which fills him with horror. So what sort of vision was it that he can respond in that way? And then at the top of the next page, that indented quote there, 474, the sun of knowledge, capital K, is yet once more at its point of high noon, and the eternal serpent is stretched out ringwise in its light. So again, these are the words of Nietzsche at this time. And then stop me in a moment by all means, but I'm just on a roll. So middle of page 475, Zarathustra, as Nietzsche's Zarathustra, of course, is his luminous double. Zarathustra is himself. The one becomes two, and two make only one. I mean, this is the language of possession that de Lubac's talking about in relation to Nietzsche's own words. And then about 8 lines down, should he sing of the God who had overwhelmed him, or curse with gnashing teeth the demon who was torturing him?
Yep.
Well, yes, but I want to go back, because you mentioned on page 474, the eternal serpent is stretched out ringwise. What does that mean? Eating his tail, right? Because on page 473 at the bottom, he laughed at it and shut it at it in turn. This terrible and marvelous revelation, this ambivalent thought, is held together by two words: the eternal return. So that seems to be the content, the substance of this vision that he has, this ecstasy. But that's not new. I mean, the entire world, East and West, had a view of the eternal return until Judaism, with the idea of history, and Christianity broke that circle to say, no, history is a line going from creation to Christ to the Parousia. So, I mean, even the fact that Nietzsche should think that he's the brilliant divine prophet who's discovered something phenomenal, I'm just a pedestrian thing, but what he's proclaiming is something which everybody thought until Christ came. Why does he think he's so brilliant?
Well, it sort of reminds me of the push to ordain women as priests. And we're told that this is being progressive. Priestesses are as old as the hills. There's absolutely nothing new about priestesses in pagan cults. So it's so funny when people latch on to very old things and think that they're putting forth a new idea that represents some step in progress,
Yeah, absolutely. And de Lubac says that on page 478. Father, we better at translating these terms better than I will. I think I know them, but yeah, he talks about the fact that Nietzsche's claims of originality are false. So just over halfway down page 478, speaking of a paramnesiac phenomenon or of a cryptomnesiac phenomenon. And Father Sertolange says, quote, this brain of fire, this is Nietzsche's brain, this brain of fire burns away memories as soon as a new burst of its interior flame comes to surprise it. So, cryptomnesiac presumably means the theft of memory, right? The theft of, is that right? And paramnesiac, something which is beyond memory. I think the key thing here is that de Lubac seems to be saying, and Father Sertolange seems to be saying, that Nietzsche either forgets or chooses to forget, or in other words, pretends to forget the old ideas that he's proclaiming as his own.
In those intervening pages, there's that quote from Nietzsche on 476, bottom there. This work, he says, which is his work, is absolutely in a class by itself. A Goethe or Shakespeare would never be able to breathe a single instant in this atmosphere of formidable passion and vertiginous heights. Oh, but I, Nietzsche, can, Dante is merely a believer, not someone who first and foremost creates the truth. Oh, yes, we're going to create the truth. Talk about thinking himself as God.
Yep.
A spirit who dominates the world, a fateful inevitability. The poets of the Veda are priests, unworthy to untie the seances of Zarathustra. And even all this does not give an idea of the azure distance, the blue distance, in which this work lives. I mean, wow, this guy has really lost his mind.
Yeah.
And well, as de Lubac then says after that quote, yes, there is without a doubt in this tone of his enormous braggadocio that is a forerunner of the abyss. I thought that was so interesting that this kind of colossal demonic pride is the forerunner of the abyss.
Yeah, and I'm tempted actually to add in it's a pun, a phonetic pun that works in Cockney, but probably not in American. Pride precedes a fall, as in FOOL. That basically his pride precedes his falling into foolishness. Well, perhaps we should finish there, Father, because we're out of time. And
well, yeah, there's a little squiggle on the page which marks some kind of a division, but just above that, he considers that he's proclaiming a fifth gospel. This fifth gospel abolishes the preceding ones, the four Christian gospels. Then down about half of that paragraph. From this day on, Nietzsche, an inspired prophet, and more than just a prophet to be sure, did not pass himself off anymore as a mere critic, an adversary of Christianity, but as a rival and successor of Jesus. Brother.
Yeah.
But he was brilliant, but that just shows dangerously brilliant,
Yeah.
I've avoided that danger. Well, let's call it for this. Let's call it for this session, and we'll finish this next session. Thank you, everybody. God bless you.
Oh, we were going to do the... Yes.
We're still on?
Oh, good.
We forgot. Thank you, Vivian. Our next text will be The Lost Magnet of Heaven, the American betrayal of, how do you say that?
You got me. I just say DM.
Diem, President of Vietnam, by Jeffrey Shaw. I mean, this is a phenomenal book which opens up so many avenues of understanding of what's good and what's bad in our country. That this man was probably a saint, head of Vietnam, would, I believe, as this author shows us, prevailed in South Vietnam, and we had him assassinated. But this is the real story. So 2 sessions from now, we'll start this.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Vivian.
If you enjoyed this discussion, please help spread the word about the Forum Book Club by subscribing to the podcast and writing a review. You can sign up for weekly updates at formedbookclub.ignatius.com.